In this episode of The Christian Philosopher, we're going to talk about the credibility of the Christian faith when it comes to miracles. Welcome back, everyone. Scott Sullivan here from the Aquinas School of Theology and Philosophy. Today, we are talking about miracles. We're going to talk about what a miracle is. We're going to talk about how miracles are possible. We're going to talk about the 4 conditions required for a true miracle. We'll talk about why Christ worked miracles, and then we'll discuss the primary Christian miracle, that is the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Let's take the first topic, the definition of a miracle. St. Thomas Aquinas, when discussing miracles, he defines them generally as miracles are works done by God outside the order usually observed in things. So miracles are works done by God outside the order usually observed in things. Now, there are a couple of important points in this definition. First of all, miracles are works done by God. Okay, so they can't be done by natural created things like human beings or anything else. And they are works done outside the order usually observed in things. So miracles by definition are extraordinary. They don't usually happen. And you wouldn't be able to recognize a miracle if you didn't already know what usually happens. So miracles by definition then have to be rare. They can't happen all the time. If water changed into wine all the time, it wouldn't be a big deal. You wouldn't recognize it as a miracle. No, miracles by their very nature, by their very definition, are something extraordinary. These things don't usually happen. So that's important for recognizing a miracle, because sometimes people want to criticize our understanding or our recognition of miracles by saying, well, these things don't usually happen, Well, yeah, of course they don't usually happen, because if they did, you wouldn't recognize them as a miracle. So in order to recognize something, happening outside the laws of nature, you have to first know what the laws of nature are and how things usually behave. So miracles here, given this definition by St. Thomas Aquinas, have to be rare, at least relatively rare, in order to recognize them as miracles. Now, it's just not prudent to willy-nilly believe in any old weird thing and call it a miracle. So traditionally understood, there are 4 conditions required for a true miracle. The first one is that the event be perceived by the senses. If we can't sense it, we can't know it. The miraculous event must be perceptible by our sense experience, and then it can be preserved, through testimony and handed down through later generations. But the original event, at least, the original miraculous event, must be perceptible by the senses in order to be a true miracle. The second one is that it cannot be done by any natural or created cause. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to know that God is acting if a created thing could do it. The third one is that the event leads us to God. So we're not just talking about weird things like, just frogs falling out of the sky for no reason. No, there has to be some kind of religious context. When we're talking about a miraculous event, we're talking about God making a temporary exception to the natural order of things to show that he is acting. And just, weird unconnected events don't do that. So in order to qualify for a true miracle, the event has to lead us to God in some way. And the fourth one is it has to be extraordinary. It has to have some kind of a wow factor, something improbable, something that goes against the laws of physics or the laws of nature, something that really stands out as going something outside the order we usually see in things. Otherwise, it's not that big of a deal. So, normal humdrum things, these things aren't really miraculous, right? So the event in question has to be extraordinary as well. All right, let's talk now about the possibility of miracles, because sometimes people object and say things like miracles are impossible. This is silly. If God exists, miracles are possible. God is the author of all nature. He's the author of the entire physical realm, and he is the author of how things normally operate. So all things are subject to his will. So God can, at any time he wants to, step in, intervene, and interrupt the natural order of things. God is not bound to the natural order that he created. So this idea that the laws of nature can never be violated, it's just silly. The greatest and most encompassing law of nature is this: the existence of all things is subject to the will of God at all times. Let me say this again. The greatest and most encompassing law of nature there is this. The existence of all things is subject to the will of God at all times. So God created all of nature. He created all the physical laws. All those things are subject to his will, and a miracle is just a rare and unusual application of this law. So this brings us to the question now, why Christ worked miracles. He didn't do this because he wanted to put on some kind of magic show and just merely wow his audience. No, the reason why Christ worked miracles is he worked them in proof of his divine character. So for example, in the Gospel of Matthew it says, after John the Baptist sent messengers to ask Jesus if he were the Christ, Jesus replied, "Go and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them." So the primary reason why Christ worked miracles was to prove his divine character. Now you should also know there are two main kinds of miracles, physical and moral. So the physical ones we've been talking about. These are the extraordinary interruptions of the physical laws of nature. But there are also moral miracles. These refer to the free will of human beings. For example, the rapid spread of Christianity in the ancient world, in spite of all the persecutions and the Christian doctrines that curb all the pleasures of the flesh. All right, let's talk now about the primary Christian miracle, that is the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. St. Paul says, if Christ has not been raised, then your faith is in vain. So obviously a very important Christian miracle. There are a lot of formulations for this argument. A common one goes like this. If Christ rose from the dead, the religion he taught is true. Christ rose from the dead, therefore the religion he taught is true. First premise of this argument is true, given that the resurrection of the dead, that qualifies as a miracle, and given the religious and historical context in which this event happened, it seems like a divine confirmation of the teaching of Jesus. And there are also reasons for thinking that the second premise is true. If Christ did not rise from the dead, then the apostles who said that he did, they were either deceived or they themselves were deceivers. But it doesn't make much sense to say that the apostles were deceivers. When you go and preach the resurrection of Jesus in that context, you put your life at risk. You're going to be tortured and killed. So there's no real personal gain here for spreading a fraudulent theory about the resurrection of Jesus. And nor is it reasonable to think that the apostles were deceived, since the claim that Jesus rose from the dead could have easily been disproven by the enemies of Christ. All they had to do was go exhume his body and present it to all the people, and boom, there goes the resurrection theory. So it's not reasonable to think that the apostles were deceivers that would put them at a high risk for their lives with no reward. Nor is it reasonable to think that the apostles themselves were deceived, since if they were wrong about that, it could have been easily disproven by the enemies of Christ, and therefore the conclusion seems to be sound. The religion that Jesus taught is true. Hey guys, just real quickly here, if you like these videos and you want to learn more about some of the stuff that I teach, you can visit my website, scottmsullivan.com. I have what I call the Aquinas School of Theology and Philosophy. We have courses in logic, philosophy, theology, a whole bunch of stuff. You can check it out. We have a free trial. It's available on my website. Again, check it out, scottmsullivan.com.